it was a war. It was emotional, it was stressful, it was dramatic, it was painful. But when I crossed the finish line, all of that was lifted and it was pure elation. I had accomplished something that I didn't think I could.
For $10, like I can feel it like a little bit, but shit's, it's really not that expensive. But if you want to get loaded, you gotta spend like 20 at least, really. But it felt bomb and it was good. I'm pretty quick at it. I mean, sometimes most people, like if you talk to most people that have been doing it for a couple of years, they'll tell you that it takes them like half an hour, sometimes hours, just to be able to, get it in and whatever. But it's never been a problem for me. I just hit the same spot and just in and out and I'm done.
There's two words, endogenous versus exogenous. So endogenous things are things from my body. When you go running, right, you get a big release of endorphins, right? That's an endogenous opiate. We've got that in our body already. All these drugs are doing, Oxycontin, heroin, is binding to the same receptors in our brain that these endogenous endorphins, dynorphins, and capillins, these endogenous opiates are binding to. And the example is when you go running or you get injured, for example, you get a big release of endorphins, right? That's an endogenous, very complex opiate that binds to the same receptors that an exogenous or a out of my body drug does. So, heroin, sure, it's binding the same receptors that endorphins are. It's just that it's so much more powerful at activating those receptors and for a longer period of time. Same with Oxycontin, same with any of these drugs. Yeah.
It's tough to put that in words, the feeling, but it's a very joyous and gratifying feeling, and it's joy, and it beats out any suffering, any misery you may have gone through preparing for it.
Right after you do a shot, you'll feel it within like 15 seconds, and it's really hard to explain. It's almost like the difference between black and white. Like, for somebody that's never done any kind of drugs or anything like that, you can't really describe to them how it feels when you do something, like whether it's Molly or heroin or meth or whatever the drug is. You get a rush that just makes you feel hella good, and you love it.
Addiction is an equal opportunity problem, and it affects everyone regardless of race and socioeconomic status and functioning level and family base.
The public perception of addiction is people that are poor, people that are uneducated, homeless people that are in prisons. We have this sort of societal picture in our head of what an addict is, and it's generally speaking sort of a non-productive member of our society. I think it's important for people to understand a couple of things. That one, as I was saying, actually not everybody that uses drugs becomes an addict. So in that sense, it's very much a disease. It's just like not everybody that eats fried food becomes obese. Only a subset of people do. So it's not that, just because you decided to take drugs that you're an addict, and so just don't decide to take drugs. It's really a disease of the brain, and I think that's probably the number one thing that I think is important to get across to everybody, that addicts aren't addicts by choice. They're addicts because they happen to take drugs and it produced this fundamental change in their brain that switched them into a person that they probably don't necessarily want to be.
I've been running since I was real young. My dad was a runner in high school, so if I could put an age on it, I would guess 7, 8 years old.
When I was a kid, I grew up racing quads, flat track all around Washington. Went camping, fishing all the time. I've done a lot of different stuff. Like I played basketball until I realized that I wasn't growing any taller. I'm only 5'6", and so I wrestled for a while, and I was hella good at that. I was undefeated, but I quit for no reason. But I might add, I guess, that the first time I drank, I was probably 12 too.
I started getting triathlons 4 years ago. Seafair Triathlon on Lake Washington was my first outdoor. Rainman 2011, right here at Green Lake, was my very first triathlon, and I placed 22nd in that.
And the way that I would describe it is, it was really just a bad mistake. It was a bad mistake on my part because I was kicking it with my friends, drinking like any other 19-year-olds usually would or whatever. And a couple of my friends, I mean, this whole epidemic on heroin started with Oxy, Oxycontin or whatever, OC80s, the green beans, and everybody started smoking them. But it was one friend at first, and everybody else was drinking, and then there'd be 4 or 5 friends in the back room, and then only a few people drinking, and then it was me drinking, and everybody was in the room smoking. So I'd go in the room drunk one night, and I tried it. I didn't even get high. I didn't feel it at all, and I was just like, it's lame, whatever. And then the next day, doing the same thing, I tried it again, and I got loaded, and it was fucking bomb. So from then on, it was like, not immediately after that did I try it, but I tried it again eventually, and then the durations just kept getting shorter and shorter.
You've got various theories of why we use drugs, and so I think for many, many years we were functioning under this working theory that people use drugs because they have low willpower and because withdrawal is so bad that they would rather avoid that than anything. This was pretty much the premise of the Dare to Not Do Drugs campaign, and how we kind of treated addicts for many, many years. And I think that the research finally caught up, and people started getting informed by that research and saying, hey, wait a second, things are changing in the addict's brain because of the drug, and or this addict, this individual, from day one, from birth, has some changes, subtle changes in these, we call them addiction pathways. They're also just called attention pathways, salience pathways. There's multiple ways to look at this. But that pathway is changed from birth, from day one, so that child will have a need that they need to fill.
I think the common thing is pain, whatever that is. And so I think a lot of people come to opiate addiction through physical pain that they're treating with pain medications, and then they become addicted to those pain medications. I think a lot of other people are treating emotional pain, feelings of shame, of feeling disconnected to other people, lack of belonging. I think there's a lot of different feelings that drive people to fix that feeling. And I think that's why opiates in particular are so addicting, is that they're very good at fixing pain.
So one of the key aspects of why this is such an addictive drug is that it's a very hydrophobic area. Okay, it's a hydrophobic molecule. It means it crosses very nicely the blood-brain barrier. So when you take it, within a very short time, it goes to areas like the basal ganglia. And in the basal ganglia, it goes into the center that controls your motivation, your pleasure, and all sorts of things, because this area, which is called the ventral tegmental area, is connected to another area, which is the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens is the one that causes you euphoria and, is your pleasure area, so to speak. And the danger of heroin is, as I said, it's a molecule that is designed or is set in a way that it goes very quickly into your brain. So there are other drugs that are similar, they do the same thing, but they don't go so fast, and you don't get addicted to them.
I stopped running after high school in 2001. It's hard to talk about that period of time for me. I didn't think it would be, because at the time I thought I was just having fun and just doing what 20-year-olds did. I had a job as an electrician, I was blue collar, and I thought that gave me the right. I thought I earned my drugs and alcohol. I thought that's kind of what blue collar men did. And that drugged me so far away from any truth and who I really am as an athlete.
The reality is so skewed
that people start to behave in ways that are actually incongruent with their values. So that's why I think it's so important to look at an addict as, you know, this is the person, this is who they are as a person, and this is who they are as an addict. And they're not the same thing, because they're not the same person. So this person might do tons of things that this person would never do because they're chemically altered.
I know that if I don't continue my training and I don't continue to move forward, I'm going to become stagnant and I'm going to become idle, and I'm susceptible to getting back into a lifestyle of drugs and alcohol. And I have to. I have to run. I have to ride my bike. I have to swim.
Really interested in kind of the natural ways that our brain rewards us for certain things, and how we seek those rewards in healthy and unhealthy ways. And I think that that insight is also really useful for people who are struggling themselves with their addictions. Is this really important question of how has the drug use been useful to you, and in what ways does it serve you, and what other ways can you be served? And so, for example, I think a lot of people can, from asking themselves some of those questions and getting insight into those areas, figure out, is part of the answer to healing this addiction going to include exercise? I know a lot of people, when they first want to make some of these changes around their substance use, find that they're successful when they train for a marathon, or they go on a long distance bike ride, or they do a diet cleanse. And I think a lot of what they're getting out of those things is it gives them some structure to avoid the substance use, but it also replaces some of those really good feelings, right? That people get endorphins when they're long distance run, and that can be really rewarding too.
Yeah, a little bit. But the problem is, like, most of the time it's just feeling regular, you know, and that's what I trying to strive for just throughout the day. Like, I don't really care that much about getting high anymore. It's just, I just want to be regular so that I can get my mind on other things other than that, you know. It's like, that's number one.
The more you use, the more you knock out your natural way of having pleasure. So when people get sober, they're like flat because they've knocked out half of their natural reward system. Like, we don't produce dopamine in the same way that we were producing it before we started using. So the process of getting sober is really difficult for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is that it's actually chemically, your brain has chemically changed and has to change back.
So if I created this physiological need, I'm feeding that with the drug. And so in that case, it has nothing to do with willpower. It's nothing to do with really even liking the drug. You need it in your life. You need that drug, not because you're afraid of withdrawal, not because withdrawal feels bad, but because there's a new normal in your brain. In fact, most addicts don't even get that physiological response of the high anymore, and it's not even super rewarding anymore. It's just that it's the only, they've created such a need for it physiologically at the level of the neuron. My synapses have changed that I'm just feeding that need.
I'm really just at the point where I'm sick of it. The problem is I need to separate myself from, like, the everyday life and the people and just the whole routine of it all. That's what it is basically. It's just been a routine. Waking up and not having any real responsibility throughout the day, just doing whatever I want to do. That's the problem. It's going from that life to, you know, having to do something that you don't want to do and just getting used to it, you know.
You know what you're doing with addiction is you're replacing your endogenous drive, you know, to get pleasure, to get a motivation. You're replacing this endogenous drive with heroin. You know, basically heroin is the one that is now driving your behavior, and that's the addiction, because this heroin is much stronger than your endogenous drive, and then becomes the dominant force that makes you seeking for drugs, makes you living for drugs, and changes your whole entire personality, because that becomes the driver of all your behaviors.